So I just woke up and yesterday I rewatched The Dark Knight, and I also rewatched some of the videos that I shot with the Joker makeup on about 10 years ago. And the first thing I realized when I saw those videos was that I didn't know what I was talking about. In the sense that I did, because some of those insights were legit, but they were merely flat insights, quote unquote flat insights, versus deep insights. Because I was just intellectualizing with the mind, like I didn't have the direct experience to back up what I was saying. And deep insights are direct experiential insights. The difference between the two are quantum. Fingers pointing to the moon, which is just words and concepts, talking about the moon versus the moon itself, or just seeing, reading a sheet music versus hearing the music and even playing the instrument. It took me 10 years to actually directly experience and embody some of the stuff that I was talking about. When I was talking about having no head, it kind of feels like my 360 videos where you have this like global panoramic vision of the world. The whole thing about this headless way is that it's a type of self-inquiry to find out who you really are from the direct experience, first-person subjective perspective. You have no head. Instead of a head, you have a boundless, infinite, timeless, spaceless opening that is the whole world. Another thing that I was holding on to in the old video was the fact that you shouldn't have paradoxes or contradictions in your thinking. Once you embody infinities, there's no reason to think that you can juggle paradoxes with no hands. And in fact, I would say that the more paradoxes and contradictions you can hold in your mind, the more expensive your consciousness awareness is. So the question is not whether or not I have a face or not. From the perspective of oneness, it should be perceived as everything that's manifesting in reality is just quote unquote God witnessing itself. Christopher Nolan's Joker is somewhat of a fucked up, enlightened being. He really has no self. He's not really attached to the stories about his past, because every time he talks about his scar is a different story. So in a sense, he understands the fact that the self is just a story. And he realizes that he is nothing and that he is nothing, and the impermanence of the self, which is what makes him fearless. See, Batman is super unenlightened from that perspective, because he's still holding on to the identity that that there is, good, there's justice that needs to be served. See, enlightenment is about transcending and leaping out of the yin and yang circle that includes the good versus evil duality. But then again, non-duality includes all dualities, the absolute includes all relatives. So just because you are enlightened doesn't mean that you don't have to operate on the human level, because awakening or enlightenment includes all the levels below. And he's still holding on to that memory of him as a boy, his parents getting killed, and he spent his whole life holding on to that impossibility of permanence. And the Joker just said, fuck that. And here I want to just point out the difference between enlightenment and being a good person. There is a correlation, but it's not a causation. Just because you had some kind of awakening and you recognize the true self of no self and the emptiness of reality, which are the major insights of awakening, enlightenment is about recognizing the true nature of reality and of the mind of the self, which is the same thing. But it doesn't guarantee that your character becomes more wholesome. Awakening can happen to anybody. It can happen to a psychopath. It could happen to somebody who is very compassionate. Awkward moment. That's why you need to wake up, clean up, and grow up. Waking up is the easiest part. It's the cleaning up and the growing up. Cleaning up the character. You need like psychotherapy for that. Just meditation and consciousness work itself could help, because after my awakening, my suffering has gone down by like 90%. So for me personally, there is a good correlation and carry over. But for some people, that's not always the case. So you get those enlightened assholes who like spiritually bypass. They say, oh, everything's empty, nothing matters, everything's perfect, I don't need to be a good person. They just become even more of an asshole than they were before. That's why you see all those gurus, they take advantage of the power, because they had some really deep awakening, some really deep experiences, and they are able to produce awakening in other people. But their character is still here, because enlightenment is transhuman. It goes beyond the character.
Look at me, I'm so cool. I don't give a fuck about what you think, right? I'm just being myself, those people are fucking assholes. If you fucking one of those people, fuck you. They want you.
It's one of the most interesting things about Heath Ledger's Joker is that people are so fascinated with that character, but he doesn't really have the backstory. It's just like a blank slate. It's just like a canvas that part of the story could manifest through, like a vessel. He doesn't have a plan. It's like he's just in flow state.
There are people down there, the masses or the ignorant herds, without them sitting on the bottom of the mountain doing their stupid thing that you think they're doing. You wouldn't be up there sucking at your own and thinking you're so much better than them, right? It's like fucking mainstream underground shit, right? All those hippies and emo that always, they're like, oh, I'm not part of the masses, I can think for myself, whatever, I'm not following the herd. Fuck that, you need the herd.
Can you introduce me as Joker?
If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it,
I would say I have mixed feelings about it, and it was overall a pretty entertaining film. Like the cinematography and the editing, art direction, acting were all excellent, but it didn't really mind fuck me. I think one problem I have with it is that the character development and the portrayal of mental illness is sort of one-dimensional. It lacks nuance, and it's sort of, the whole movie was sort of like a one-note symphony. So it's almost like all the actions of the Joker and even the characters around him are sort of like billboards, just bouncing off of each other, and then there's blood coming out of the balls. It's like he laughs, all his laughs are the same, and then he dances, and then he kills people. Speaking of mental illness, if I were to portray mental illness in a film, not to say that this way or that way is how you should portray mental illness, but I would add in like just a splash of light or brilliance in his eyes. Not just some guy who's just totally 100% insane. And maybe like he was actually really good at making brilliant jokes, but no one gets it, or that he plays the harmonica really well, or he makes his own shoes or whatever, but then his boss didn't really give a fuck about those things. I don't know. Maybe he had some mystical experiences, like glimpses of truth during his most manic moments, but then falls back into insanity. Again, going back to the comparison between this Joker, the new Joker, and Heath Ledger's version, is that I think the new Joker's portrayal is from the inside out, the subjectivity of the Joker. And then Heath Ledger's Joker is portrayed from the perspective that is coming from the outside in. So you could say that the main character of The Dark Knight isn't the Joker or Batman or Two-Face. It was Gotham itself. It's the mind of Gotham, the collective consciousness of Gotham with a capital C and a capital M. And the new Joker movie, the main focus is on the mind with a small m, the ego of the individual self that is the Joker, and how the Joker come to construct this identity. See, he was saying that, oh, before I didn't exist, but now I do. See, that progression is really a move away from truth. And it's about somebody who's stuck in his own head. And The Dark Knight, really, all those characters are just pieces of a puzzle that eventually solves itself. So it's like
ego Joker versus woke Joker, and total identification with emotions versus disidentification with emotions versus not even giving a fuck whether he's quote unquote Joker or not versus super invested in being a Joker character.
And Batman and a Joker are just sort of, again, empty vessels where certain elements of this puzzle, of this whole, can manifest itself through as parts. And Batman being the agent of order and rationality, and Joker being the agent of chaos and irrationality, which two sides makes up the whole. So they both need each other. That's why the Dark Knight movie doesn't really focus on the individual mind of the Joker so much, or the individual mind of Batman. There are elements of that, but that is sort of the backdrop of the whole that is Gotham City itself. So, and that's why in Christopher Nolan's version, you see a lot of shots, a lot of like sky, aerial, helicopter shots of the city. And then there's not a lot of close-up of the characters doing like everyday mundane tasks. And it's fine, like both portrayal are legit, you know, one from the first person perspective, like a first person video game, the other from the third person perspective, the God's eye, third person perspective, portrayal. But like I said, if you are going to go deep into the subjectivity of a character, it would help if you make that character a little bit more nuanced and multifaceted. And from the kinetic standpoint, Nolan's Joker was more in line with Emptiness dancing. And then Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was more like somebody who was swimming very slowly in mud. And see, Nolan's Joker was more pure and transparent because, like I said in the beginning, he was really operating from the plane of no self. And ironically, one of the criticisms I had of The Dark Knight was that the form was too rigid. The way they shot it, just the flow of the whole film, the mechanics of the film was too mechanical. But the character, especially the Joker, was the opposite, was very spontaneous and very bouncy. But the new Joker was the reverse. The form was really elastic. The form was very fluid, like the way it was shot and filmed and edited, with the handheld camera versus, like, you know, just having the big ass IMAX machine camera. But the character was rigid.